We hear you, really we do. Turn Cena heel. Let's see a Cena heel turn. There's still time to turn Cena heel. And it's understandable. Heels, aka bad guys, get to have all the fun. And because of the way wrestling likes to tell tales of heroes overcoming the biggest and baddest men and monsters on the planet, top heels also get to be the centerpiece of many a story, often even the entire show. The best heels are often ones justified in their actions, or simply so detached from the norm that we barely understand them. In the case of the latter, guys like Brock Lesnar perfectly fit the mold and are therefore more often than not career bad guys. But in the case of the former, there's usually a trigger that points them towards the dark side and provides us with a sign of how dastardly they are to be. Often these guys are holier than thou good guys with a lot going for them until snap. In this list, we're going to look at some of those guys, and more accurately, the moments in which their character motivations and actions met to produce some of the most memorable changes of attitude in wrestling history. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and these are the 10 best WWE heel turns ever. Join us! Number 10, Austin aligns with McMahon, WrestleMania X7. Ranking as low as number 10 in this list due to the divisive reaction towards what was to come of the turn, this huge moment in wrestling history is actually not only deserving of a spot on this list due to its impact as a movement, but also because of its impact on wrestling as a whole. In many ways, Austin's heel turn marked the pinnacle of the Attitude Era, arguably the greatest period in wrestling history, and was the ultimate encounter in the epic feud of the era between Austin and Rock, not to mention an important moment in the feud between Austin and McMahon. It was the main event of the record-breaking WrestleMania X7 from Houston, Texas, and it was home state hero Stone Cold Steve Austin versus WWF champion The Rock for the title. No DQ, a history-making moment, so history-making that even the My Way video package is iconic. "I have to beat you," Austin told Rock in advance of the match, and he clearly meant by any means necessary. As the main event rolled over, the evil Mr. McMahon would become involved, handing Austin a chair that would help to deliver Stone Cold the victory and therefore the title. Was it an act of desperation from a man so dead set on achieving his goal of becoming champion, or was this truly an alliance between two long-term rivals? Well, a post-match handshake would confirm most fans' fears that Austin had turned to the dark side, with Jim Ross offering the perfect cherry on top for this astronomical heel turn of a cake with the line, "My God, Austin has just shaken hands with the devil himself." Number 9, Sergeant Slaughter turns on America. Saddam Hussein did not invade Kuwait, he conquered Kuwait. Words spoken from the mouth of the once patriotic army sergeant Sergeant Slaughter as he became an Iraqi sympathizer in the midst of the First Gulf War to become the biggest heel in wrestling and a bad guy so on the nose we're all a little surprised he ever got away with it. Once the voice of an actual G.I. Joe character, Sergeant Slaughter was a huge babyface throughout the 80s, playing off the patriotism of the American people and the country's almost universally positive feelings towards the American flag. But during his absence from the WWF between 1985 and 1990, something changed in him. In kayfabe at least. And he returned to our screens as an Iraqi sympathizer, spouting the sort of verbiage we quoted earlier. It was such a drastic turn from his run as the ultimate patriot, and was so impactful that he was sent death threats by impassioned fans opposed to Hussein and the Iraqi regime of the time, but it did lead him to the WWF Championship and the main event of WrestleMania 7, so who are we to judge political allegiances? Fair play, Sarge. Number 8, Tommaso Ciampa betrays Johnny Gargano, NXT TakeOver Chicago. Betrayal, heartbreak, tears. Admit it, you were, as the cool kids would say, shook. It was one of the biggest moments of 2017, and probably the biggest moment in NXT history as far as fan investment goes, and it was all played out so beautifully from the performances, to the production, right through to the booking, that it simply had to be on our list. In the aftermath of a dramatic loss in a 3-way tag match against the Revival and winners the Authors of Pain, #DIY were given the whole treatment by the NXT production crew. They were displayed as valiant losers and were awarded the time to be celebrated post-match in the same way main roster call-ups are. They even had the end of the show NXT graphic pop up in the bottom right corner to indicate that no more action was to be had. Then, betrayal, heartbreak, tears. Ciampa turned on his longtime friend to end one of the most believable on-screen relationships on any WWE programming in recent years. That includes Total Divas, and it was all set up so perfectly. Not only had they forged their paths in the WWE together, but Ciampa and Gargano had battled in the Cruiserweight Classic, and Gargano had jumped in front of a ladder-shaped bullet in the very match before this turn. With the production thrown in to lead us away from the scent of a heel turn, this was perfectly orchestrated, playing on all of our expectations and delivering a blow as brutal as any top heel turn should ever feel. Number 7, Chris Jericho throws Shawn Michaels through the JERITRON, Raw 2008. If this list is to teach us anything, it's that heel turns are always best when the good guy has a legitimate and understandable reason to turn bad. One such occasion occurred in 2008 when Chris Jericho turned heel on longtime idol turned rival Shawn Michaels by throwing him through his trusty and somewhat iconic JERITRON TV monitor on an episode of Jericho's in-ring talk show, The Highlight Reel. The reason for the brutal attack was simple. People continued to adore Michaels even though he had cheated his opponent Batista and therefore special guest referee Chris Jericho on the way to an important victory over the Animal, something Jericho considered to be blatantly disrespectful of his role in the entire saga and indicative of a fandom he no longer felt he understood. Playing as if a mirror to Michaels' breakout moment of throwing former partner Marty Jannetty through a glass panel on Brutus Beefcake's barbershop talk show segment some 16 years earlier, Jericho's actions were indicative of a wrestler who'd learned from the mistakes of his past feud with Michaels and shown he had grown to understand the Heartbreak Kid as something entirely different from the icon he had considered him as being in the lead up to WrestleMania 19. No longer was he copying the look and the moveset, but he was playing him at his own game, a game much dirtier and more morally corrupt than he had originally been able to see. This wasn't only a heel turn for Jericho, but also one of the most important moments in the development of his career, as it indicated his evolution from young and arrogant superstar to battle-tested, intelligent veteran. For Michaels, it was his own saga coming full circle, with the once young and impressionable fan taking the lessons learned from Michaels himself to create an impact comparable with that of the 1992 barbershop incident. Start to finish, this was simply sensational storytelling. Number 6, CM Punk on The Rock, Raw 2012. In the summer of 2011, CM Punk's issues with the WWE were aired in his now famous pipe bomb promo, and the self-proclaimed voice of the voiceless somewhat accidentally became the biggest babyface in the WWE for what had been over a decade. Come the summer of 2012, he was the biggest star in the company, but when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson would return as part of his back-to-back stints as a WrestleMania main eventer, a small line from Punk's pipe bomb would pay heed. The fact that Dwayne is in the main event of WrestleMania next year, and I'm not, makes me sick. Punk's reluctance to accept The Rock's return was a part of his anti-McMahonism's persona that boiled under the surface for months, leading to his eventual confrontation with the Great One on an August episode of Raw in 2012. It had been over a year since his comments, but in the meantime, The Rock had main evented WrestleMania despite Punk's explosion in popularity. Come the fateful episode of Raw in which the turn would happen, Punk had a legitimate reason to turn. He had been ignored by The Office, and The Rock was the focal point of everything he saw as being wrong about the WWE. One flying clothesline later, and the game was changed. The summer of Punk became the longest champion in the modern era Punk, your arms are just too short to box with God Punk, and for a short time, biggest heel in all of wrestling Punk. Number 5, Seth Rollins turns on the Shield. Like a knife to the back of his own brother, Seth Rollins whipped back a steel chair and planted it in the back of his Shield brethren Roman Reigns on an episode of Raw in 2014, thus breaking up the Shield for good. Well, sort of. It was a shot heard around the wrestling world and set in motion the coming era of wrestling in the WWE. Rollins aligned with the Authority, Ambrose and Reigns were set off on their different courses, and the iconic group was never to be the same again. It was a turn perfectly told, perfectly performed, and perfectly orchestrated. The Shield had probably done all they could as a group, so it was time to dismantle them, but seeing Rollins swing the chair instead of Ambrose, who many had assumed would be the one to turn, and seeing him do it in order to join long-term rivals the Authority, themselves the antithesis of the anarchist mindset of the Shield, was a shocking but sadistically satisfying moment that we all should have seen coming, but didn't. What made this even more perfect of a moment was the selling of Reigns, who fell forward towards the bottom rope as if he had actually been stabbed in the back, and the reaction of Ambrose, who looked surprised, confused, conflicted, and then angry all in a matter of moments. It was the perfect combination of factors performed by talents truly worthy of their spots. Number 4, Andre the Giant aligns with Bobby Heenan to chase Hogan and the title. What happens when the irresistible force finally meets the immovable object? In wrestling, nobody truly knew until Andre the Giant challenged Hulk Hogan to a WWF title match at WrestleMania 3. It was on Piper's Pit in 1987 with Hulk Hogan as the special guest when Andre made his intentions known. Entering the set with the dastardly brain Bobby Heenan, donning a new suit and seemingly more self-assured attitude, Andre challenged Hogan to a WWF title match, ignoring how Hogan had just described Andre as the reason he got into wrestling and refusing to acknowledge the wrongs that Heenan had committed during his absence earlier in the year. Andre would rip off Hogan's shirt, leaving him bleeding from the chest and visibly crying at the betrayal. So just like that, the biggest WrestleMania main event in history was set. It would be the WWF champion of 3 years, Hulk Hogan, versus the Giant, whom supposedly hadn't been defeated in 15 years, Andre the Giant, for the WWF title at WrestleMania 3. The rest, as they say, is history. Number 3, Shawn Michaels throws Marty Jannetty through the barbershop window. Probably the most replayed heel turn in the history of professional wrestling, the breakup of the Rockers in 1992 is as iconic for the different trajectories of the two characters as it is for the brutal impact, surprise, and the sadness that came with seeing one of history's most beloved and exciting teams split for good. Almost certainly more famous than the talk show it took place on, Michaels' turn on Jannetty was beautifully called by the always untrustworthy Bobby Heenan, who, moments after saying that they'd be friends for good, uttered, "I knew he was gonna do that," as Michael planted his right foot underneath the chin of his fellow rocker. The follow-up would see Michaels put a full stop on his time with Jannetty by throwing him headfirst through a glass plate that was part of Brutus Beefcake's barbershop set, solidifying the suspicion that Michaels had orchestrated the whole thing and that it wasn't just an act of frustration and/or anger. Michaels would go on to main event WrestleManias and have 2 distinctly iconic runs at the top of the WWE, well, 3 if you count Crown Jewel, while Jannetty would soon fade into oblivion. I guess at least both would always be able to share this iconic WWE moment. Number 2, Randy Savage turns on Hulk Hogan, the mega powers collide over Elizabeth. When 2 stars as huge as Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage team up, it immediately becomes abundantly clear that, in wrestling, no 2 egos that big will ever be able to share a locker room for long, no matter how much the fans want them to. But to the credit of the so-called mega powers, Hogan and Savage had a solid run of about a year that would act as the build to this, our second biggest heel turn in WWE history. As Hogan and Savage became close, so did Hogan and Macho Man's wife, Elizabeth. She would jump into Hogan's arms after victories and be seen getting uncomfortably intimate with him at ringside or backstage, all the time making Savage more paranoid and more hot-tempered. Then, one day, as Elizabeth lay injured in a hospital bed per the result of what the Macho Man thought to be Hogan's fault, Savage snapped. He perceived Hogan as making moves on his wife and was finally done with putting up with it. He struck Hogan and began a brawl that would lead to the mega powers colliding at WrestleMania 5. It was the makings of a long run as a top heel for the Macho Man and arguably the greatest period in his solo career, but it was the turn that would live longest in the memory, solidifying it as an all-time classic. Number 1, Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13, the double turn with Austin. One of the biggest babyfaces of all time and holier than thou in many a fan's eyes, Bret Hart had come to personify the vision of the entire new generation era. But come WrestleMania 13 in 1997, fans were growing tired of the more good than good babyfaces and wanted something more edgy. In WCW, this was the heel faction NWO, who were too cool to hate, and in the WWE, it was the cuss-laden badass Stone Cold Steve Austin. As such, the WWE were faced with a conundrum at the start of 1997 regarding their presentation of characters like Hart and Austin, who had begun to divide audiences. It was a conundrum that would be answered so sensationally and definitively that it remains the greatest heel turn of all time over 20 years later. During WrestleMania 13, in a match for the WWE Championship no less, Hart and Austin told one of the most compelling stories in WrestleMania history, a story of a frustrated seasoned pro being unable to put away the hotshot redneck who would stop at nothing to prove himself. As the match moved through the gears, Hart's frustrations boiled, his actions became less honourable, and his aggression reached new heights. But Austin still wouldn't stay down. Ultimately, the match would be ended when Austin would pass out in the sharpshooter, clearly refusing to give up on his dream of becoming the WWF champion. It was a beautifully performed and perfectly orchestrated moment that capitalized on the growing love for Austin and put Hart into new, unfamiliar territory as a heel. He'd be the biggest heel in the company until his exit 6 months later, but the power of the term came in the moment it happened, a bloodied redneck refusing to give up to the master of the canvas on the grandest stage, a seasoned pro frustrated that his work had not been appreciated like it might once have been. Perfect. So that's our list. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us.